The transatlantic slave trade is undoubtedly one of the darkest periods of the current era. Thankfully, modern sensibilities find it hard to comprehend this horrific trade's scale and widespread acceptance. It seems inconceivable to most of us, but an entire economy was supported by the buying and selling of people. So, what caused this horrific yet hugely profitable system to end? There are many theories about what brought about the sudden and complete abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. These theories range from the declining economic value of enslaved people to changing moral sensibilities. However, the slave trade did not just end suddenly, and many factors contributed to its eventual abolishment. The Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was an intellectual movement centered in Europe that started in the late 1600s, but really took off in the 17th and 18th centuries. This movement's ideology focused on the power and celebration of reason and rationality, with its core values being knowledge, happiness, and freedom. It wasn't long before some participants in this movement started to question the morality and legitimacy of the slave trade. That's not to say that everyone who subscribed to the ideals of the Enlightenment was anti-slavery. Some argued that slavery was based on a hierarchy of races, and the famous French Enlightenment writer, Voltaire, invested money in the transportation of enslaved people. However, they could only preach liberty and equality for so long before some people's minds would turn to the men, women, and children being held as possessions. While the Enlightenment may not have directly led to the abolishment of slavery, it certainly started to change the minds of those in a position to oppose it. A cultural shift was set in motion by the Enlightenment that highlighted the plight of enslaved people and the inherent injustice of the transatlantic slave trade. The Quakers. The Quakers could be one of the world's most underrated activist groups. Intrinsic to the Quakers' belief is that all human beings are equal and worthy of respect, and the Quakers were amongst the first to call for the abolishment of slavery. As with prescribers to the movement, not all Quakers were anti-slavery. Still, by the 1780s, the Quakers passed an edict barring any Quaker from owning slaves. The Quaker-led abolitionist movements undoubtedly influenced Vermont's abolishment of slavery in 1777. Many prominent people involved in the Underground Railroad were Quakers, such as Thomas Garrett, who was known as the station master. Garrett helped runaways find freedom for over 40 years and reportedly aided the escape of over 2,700 enslaved people. Another prominent Quaker in the Underground Railroad was Levi Coffin, known as the Conductor. In 1847, a young Wesleyan Methodist called Reverend Adam Crooks was sent to North Carolina to minister to some churches that were anti-slavery. He was surprised by how much support he found. This liberal attitude was largely due to the work of the Quakers, also known as the Society of Friends. He wrote, "There is much more anti-slavery sentiment in this part of North Carolina than I had supposed. This is owing in great measure to the Society of Friends. It is said the treatment of slaves is much modified by their presence." The Christian abolition movement that emerged from the evangelical revival played a part in the anti-slavery movement, but the Quakers undoubtedly beat them to this moral standpoint. The early feminist movement. As equalist movements, early feminism and abolitionism went hand in hand. Many early feminists were staunch abolitionists, and after slavery was made illegal, these women continued to fight for the right to vote. Lucretia Mott, who was also a Quaker, was a pioneer of social reform. She attended the first American Anti-Slavery Society conference and was elected the president of the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Society. Lucretia was inspired to fight for the rights of women by her Quaker education and the fact that, as a female teacher, she was paid half the salary of her male counterparts. Fighting for her own rights extended to fighting for the rights of those in a worse position than she was. Despite persecution for her beliefs and gender, Lucretia continued to make her views known. Many anti-slavery books were written throughout the period of the transatlantic slave trade, the first being published in 1688 and penned by Aphra Behn. Women of all levels in society published poems and stories that depicted the horrors endured by enslaved women, usually focusing on the heartbreak of mothers being separated from their children and disgraced by the abuses of their male masters. Books like Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs and Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe were aimed directly at the sensibilities of Christian women. Despite not being able to vote, speak at anti-slavery conferences, or sign anti-slavery petitions, women played a huge role in the publicity and propagation of the abolition movement. It is worth noting that while black men got the right to vote in 1870, women would not get the vote for another 50 years, and it wasn't until 1965 that black women and men would be able to vote freely. The abolition movement. The abolitionist movement was the product of the thoughts formed during the Enlightenment and spread by the Quakers and the early women's rights movements. It was an organized collective effort to bring about the end of the transatlantic slave trade. In Europe, abolitionists started to change public opinion regarding slavery. In 1792, Denmark and Norway prohibited the transatlantic slave trade, and several other European countries followed, although it would be many years before slavery was completely abolished. Some theorize that declining profits and increased industrialization brought about these changes. However, as plantations worked by enslaved people continued to turn a profit up until the outright end of slavery, the argument that the decision was entirely profit-based seems unlikely. That being said, there is no denying that the movement gained momentum easier in areas where the majority of people did not directly profit from the transport and enslavement of Africans. In America, the movement began as the American Colonization Society in 1816. At this time, anti-slavery wasn't synonymous with equal rights for blacks, and instead focused on sending the formerly enslaved black people back to Africa. This notion was seen as a compromise between the supporters of slavery and the anti-slavery activists. By 1860, almost 12,000 African Americans had been returned to Africa. In 1830, the abolitionist movement in America emerged as a more organized and radical collective. It was dedicated to the immediate end of slavery, but in 1850, the U.S. government firmly sided with the enslavers. Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act that dictated any American citizen should cooperate with the capture of anyone who had escaped enslavement. In 1857, the Supreme Court doubled down on this by ruling that even free black people living in America did not have legal citizenship rights. It was also decided that enslaved workers could be legally taken to Western territories. These decisions caused outrage among all those involved in the abolitionist movement. As the movement grew, many black people who had been previously subjected to a life of slavery joined and made their stories known. This information helped the movement gain momentum and inspired many other enslaved people to seek their freedom. The abolitionist movement gained the least traction in the southern states of America. This anti-abolition sentiment was due to the large number of plantations that turned profits based on the free labor that slavery provided. In contrast to the North, which was becoming more industrialized, the South had continued to base its economy on slavery, which increased with the emergence of cotton-based agriculture. In 1859, a band of armed abolitionists raided the Federal Armory in Harpers Ferry, Virginia. They intended to initiate an armed rebellion of enslaved people. This attack convinced the South that their way of life, supported greatly by enslaved people, was under threat, particularly after the election of Abraham Lincoln. Although not an abolitionist himself, Lincoln opposed the spread of slavery into the western states. The growing tensions between the North and South led the country into a civil war, which directly resulted in the end of slavery in America. The American Civil War. The American Civil War, 1861 to 65, is now intrinsically linked to the abolition of slavery and was the culmination of many years of anti-slavery sentiment. While the North invested in developments such as railroads and factories, the Southern states invested almost all of their money in slavery. As a result, 3/5 of the wealthiest people in the country were Southerners. As public opinion was so polarizing and adamant, American politicians were forced to choose an allegiance rather than focusing on compromise. When Abraham Lincoln was elected president, the Republican Party's platform opposed the expansion of slavery. The South saw this stance as a threat to the industry of slavery, and 7 Southern states seceded and formed the Confederate States of America. Within weeks, 4 more Southern states had joined the Confederacy. While on the face of it, the Union fought for the abolishment of slavery, the main reason that Lincoln took the country to war was the preservation of the Union. However, abolitionists supported the war, as they saw it as a path to emancipation. Lincoln had originally proposed gradual emancipation and planned to compensate the slaveholders for their losses. This attempt to appease the slave states was a moot point once the Civil War began, and in 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, that stated any enslaved people residing in the rebellious states were to be free beginning on January 1, 1863. This statement inspired the vigorous recruiting of Black Americans into the Union Army, and by the end of the war, over 200,000 African Americans had signed up for the Union Armed Forces. Despite discrimination in pay, equipment, and rations, these men fought bravely, knowing that the lives of their brothers and the future of Black people in America depended on it. Thousands of enslaved people, used as a workforce by the Confederacy, put down their tools and escaped to join the Union. The American Civil War lasted 4 years and saw a massive loss of life through conflict, bad hygiene, and questionable medical practices in the field. By the time of its conclusion, America had changed in many ways. When the Union won the war in 1865, the 13th Amendment was added to the Constitution, and around 4 million enslaved people were finally freed. The 14th and 15th Amendments that came after granted African Americans citizenship in 1868 and the right for Black men to vote in 1870. Although this was the start of a long and rocky road concerning African Americans and their status in modern society, the Civil War brought an end to slavery in America. On December 18, 1865, nearly 350 years after King Charles I authorized the shipping of enslaved people directly from Africa to the Americas, slavery was officially abolished in the United States. An entire economy was changed for the better due to pressure from people who believed it was the right course of action, ethically and morally. These people had fought for over 100 years to persuade those in power that they needed to put people before profit. Thankfully, they were successful, but the effects of these dark times still have a marked impact on people today. Hopefully, through open discussion, we will be able to work through and face these harsh truths to come to a greater collective harmony in the future. To learn more about the transatlantic slave trade, check out our book, The Transatlantic Slave Trade, a captivating guide to the Atlantic slave trade and stories of the slaves that were brought to the Americas. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free Mythology Bundle ebook while it's still available. All links are in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.